Cracks and Pomo will be releasing a zine featuring a variety of writers, some of whom have been featured on this podcast. To order a copy or to make a contribution to our funds, please DM at Cracks and Pomo.
Welcome to Open Plaza, created by the Hispanic Theological Initiative. In this episode, join Stephen Adubato and Reverend Alex Evangelista for a listening party and conversation about Bad Bunny. For more information about today's episode, visit htiopenplaza.org.
Hi, welcome to the HTI Open Plaza podcast. My name is Stephen Adubato. I'm a professor of philosophy and a freelance writer. And I'm here today with Alex Evangelista, who is a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary and currently is a pastor at the Church on the Mall in Plymouth Meeting outside of Philly in Pennsylvania. So Alex, I'm excited to be doing this with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Alex, first tell us a little bit more about your own background, and then, since we're going to be not only discussing but hosting a listening party, listening to Bad Bunny's music, tell us a little bit also how you got into Bad Bunny.
Yeah. Oh, wow. It's a big question. So I'm a Salvadorian immigrant, raised in California. I grew up Baptist in a small town called Tulare in the Central Valley, so south of Fresno. So I remember, and then around when I was 9 years old, my parents got divorced. So single mom raising us was quite the upbringing. And living in Tulare, that was, I think, 64% Latinx. There was always Latin music playing around me. But really, I would know all the classics to some extent, but really didn't listen to it much myself. Part of my upbringing was, I felt like a little bit like surviving. So a lot of music came into my life, I think a lot more later when I was actually, focusing a little bit more on it. Really enjoyed music myself, specifically like jazz. So I started learning saxophone in, middle school, and then became first tenor when I was in high school.
Can I ask you, what was it about jazz that spoke to you in particular?
That's a great question. I think the creativity.
Mm-hmm.
I never really thought deeper about this. Probably the fact that it transcended language. Mm-hmm. I think, being Spanish being my first language, it was really hard at first, adapting to a whole world where, especially in a town that was quite conservative, speaking Spanish was kind of looked down upon. It felt like a language that in my jazz band was quite diverse, that we could all speak communally. Maybe that was a part of it. I think I also really just enjoy the creativity and the imagination that could come with creating something new every time you're gathering. What you practice in the band room compared to what you do at a, festival. It can just be so different.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
And then go ahead.
No. So then, it's interesting because, jazz, thinking about classic Latin American music to Bad Bunny, it's a little bit of a shift. So what was your way into Bad Bunny, who's much more contemporary, really has his own vibe going on?
Yeah, that's a big jump. So I think, and because I grew up very evangelical conservative, to the point where, I would always kind of have this attitude of outright rejection of anything contemporary, cultural, non-Christian, I guess you could say. It was when I went to Azusa Pacific, which was my alma mater, Christian University on the West Coast. One of my classes I did theology and biblical studies. One of my classes, we were having to engage with The class was called Culture and Ministry, if I remember correctly. And we had to look at top 10 songs and do a presentation on like kind of breaking them down.
Wow.
And I think I was maybe the 5th project in, so the first project, it was a good colleague of mine, did Swimming Pools by Kendrick.
Wow.
And so I remember hearing the song, of course, in college, but then hearing the breakdown and seeing how Kendrick wasn't actually glorifying drinking. He was making a critique of it. And like even this inner monologue he has specifically in verse 2.
Yeah.
Right. That's like, I'm trying to save you, Kendrick. But then you get all this peer pressure. That was the first time that I began to realize, wow, music can be such an interesting act of resistance. It can be a voice of critique. So that kind of began that journey for me to really kind of begin to unpack that, because then I also was reading, on the other hand, something like, like Augustine in Confessions in the City of God, and like arguably maybe Augustine being the first Christian social critic, and so I was starting to make these parallels specifically just with, music that people listen to and that really resonates with people. So that was the beginning of that shift. Happened a little bit more in seminary too, when, of course, when Kendrick released his To Pimp a Butterfly, it was the mix of both worlds I was falling in love with, jazz and hip hop.
Wow, that's a perfect combination then.
Perfect combination for me. That album, I mean, I love Good Kid, Mad City, and I still think it's a classic. Many will say it's a classic. To me, my favorite still is To Pimp a Butterfly. And so once I started doing that, it was really more in seminary that I began to, what's the word I'm looking for here? Let me try to think. It's still early in the morning and I haven't had coffee. Reclaim. It was around seminary when I started really reclaiming more of my own Latinx heritage, culture, identity, and living more into it. Because I think for so long, growing up in mostly Anglo church, same with the university, mostly, white Christian university. I always felt like I had to like be a chameleon and pretend like I wasn't Latinx. And then it was really in seminary that I was like, I really need to just start reclaiming my identity and living into it. And of course, like studying liberation theology, etc. Like it was just, I felt more empowered to really live into it. And I was like, what if I took my love for this lens of looking at hip hop and how it could be, they can be social critics, they could be criticizing Christianity as well at times. What if I took that over to my love now? Because I started falling in love with salsa, bachata. Most random story, I learned how to dance salsa when I did a year in Scotland.
Oh, wow.
From a guy from Croatia. A guy from Croatia who taught LA style salsa. So it was like so random.
What are the chances?
And I fell in love with it. And so just started listening to everything. Bad Bunny, of course, was making his rise during that time. And that's when I started paying a little bit more attention to what he was saying. I remember it was maybe 2020, 2019, maybe 2021. I was having a conversation with a friend, and we were talking kind of like we're talking today about like how music can be empowering, can be criticizing, the whole 9 yards. And he was kind of unpacking his thoughts on Bad Bunny kind of being that voice in the Latinx world. And I was like, interesting. So I started paying more close attention. And of course, when Un Verano Sin Ti dropped, I was like, you could just see a lot of the elements there that really made me realize he's doing amazing work that I think speaks to a new generation. And that just resonated a lot with my own journey of what I've been thinking when it comes to music and how it empowers me and helps me criticize and gives me a new lens.
Yeah. So when I hear you recounting your story, I find there's my earlier days where I would say kind of the inverse of yours, and yet I think we come to this point where we converge, because my family was not very religious, not very conservative. And for me, music was really what made me start to ask these big questions about life, about meaning, about, if there is a God, who is God, and what does God want from me? And I think my way into that was mostly soul music, R&B music, because my father, he would always be playing Motown. My mother was very big on disco. And because I was growing up in that environment, which is very deeply rooted in the gospel tradition, this tradition of the spirituals, which are explicitly born of this experience of suffering, this oppression, and yet this hope that there's a God who promises us liberation, happiness. But no, even in the more contemporary soul music, even in the R&B music that I grew up with, like early 2000s, there are still traces of this spiritual tension between suffering, longing. Speaking of Augustine, that restless heart. But also, again, there's a hope. There's this sense that even in my suffering, even if we're just talking about heartbreak, there's this sense that, okay, there's something more than this. There's something beyond this present moment of suffering. And I couldn't have articulated that when I was in high school, but something in my soul, I guess, like something resonated, because within my own experience of suffering, also, my parents divorced when I was very young. It's that experience of division, of instability as a kid. I knew that I wanted something that could heal me, something that could promise me that, yeah, even though there are difficulties in life, that there is a point, there is a purpose to this all. And I could hear it, like I could hear within these singers that they were expressing that same longing that I had, and they intuited there's something more, and I really wanted to find it. So it was through really delving into, the catalog of older soul music, contemporary R&B music, that's what really spurred my spiritual journey, and eventually to encounter Christian communities that became really, in a sense, became proof that God is present, that God the Father sent Jesus to be amongst us in the flesh. And so it's like what I was listening to in the music, it became a reality through Christian community. But when it comes to reggaeton, what I found, I don't know, I grew up in a very, very cozy, suburban, very Anglo environment. So the only reggaeton song I knew was Gasolina when it came out in 2004, because everybody around the world knew that song.
Right.
And when I heard it, I was like, okay, this rhythm's really fascinating, because in a way, reggaeton is borrowing a little bit from hip hop, borrowing from bomba y plena, mostly a derivative of dancehall, Jamaican reggae dancehall. So it's an interesting combination, and it's captivating when you first hear it. So I mean, I only knew Daddy Yankee, but then when I went to college, I was around more people with Latin American descent. I did hear a lot more reggaeton, and again, the rhythm, it spoke to me, and it spoke to me in that new phase of life that I was in as a young adult going into college. And what I heard that was a little bit different in the reggaeton beat, different from, again, soul music, R&B, is there's this tension, there's this build-up within the dembow, which is the drum pattern that's inherent to all reggaeton songs. And you hear in this tension, there's, in a way, there is a longing for something. There's this, you're waiting for some kind of fulfillment, some kind of resolution. And I felt like it was much more intense, much more dramatic than the way that longing is expressed in R&B. So it's a little bit more peaceful, a little more smooth in R&B. But in reggaeton, it's like, no, I really, speaking of Augustine in his earlier years, that intense passion he had, the longing of the flesh, that I heard embodied in the dembow rhythm. So again, sure, there are plenty of themes in reggaeton that, may run contrary to our values, to our faith, but the fact that there's this fundamental spiritual longing that's expressed, that enabled me to go deeper into my own faith and understand, again, how does God answer all the longings of our flesh, of our heart, of our soul? So when Bad Bunny came out, he was doing something very interesting, not only doing reggaeton, doing trap, and then eventually adding in other genres. But what really draws me to him is that there's this boldness. Like he goes all the way. He goes for it. He makes statements that are outrageous sometimes, absurd, but really forces you to stop and think like, okay, who are we as human beings, but also what's going on in our society. Even if you don't agree with what he's doing or the conclusions he comes to, I think he really forces us to confront these big questions about, again, us as individuals, but the society we live in. And the fact that he's been the #1 artist on Spotify, almost 3 years now?
Almost 3 years now, yeah.
He's got our attention. He's really captivated the globe. And I imagine like a lot of people just listen to him for entertainment, but I think if you go deeper, if you ask again, what is he saying? What is this music really about? It has the power, it has the potential to really open our eyes to a lot of important realities that need to be discussed, that need to be examined. So that's a little bit more of my background, but let's get more into like the specific songs that speak to you. I don't know, like which songs first come to mind that are, the most powerful, the most interesting of Bad Bunny's catalog?
I feel like for me it was El Apagón.
Okay.
That one, I think, when if I recall, so I think I mentioned earlier, maybe not when we officially started, but one of the conversations I had with the editor of the Presbyterian Outlook when trying to figure out what I was going to write on was on writing on Bad Bunny, and ultimately ended up writing on why I thought listening to Bad Bunny is an act of resistance, an act of resistance to suffering seeming like it's going to be forever, knowing that there's a hope and the liberation that we claim in our God. An act of resistance in the midst of oppression. And so I come up with this article, and as soon as I give it to her, to Terriot, it was that Friday that El Apagón music video came out. And it was just so, I remember sending you a text, I'm like, you got to go watch this, because, right, if I remember correctly, right, it's the music video, and then it goes into a documentary, which I think was directly to me speaking to what I think he does. He uses music, and sometimes it's like coded if you're not listening well enough, but as I think at that point, political, maybe social critique, and then also allows for that moment to give more space to also what could we do next. So it's not just like, let's just wait for liberation to come. I'm also sensing in Bad Bunny, there's a drive in him that says, yes, music can be an escape, music can be an empowerment. Music can also go into actual action. And when I saw those videos of the party of the year that he threw, that's what they were calling it. Or even when he did a party at the top of the gas station, he does stuff like this that I'm just like, this is so amazing. That's the one that sticks out to me, because I know this is an ongoing issue that happens in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about how he's able to take what's, a perfect song for parties, a celebratory song, but also to call into question certain social and political issues. And that mix of the social critique and the celebratory, again, this tension between suffering and hope, this impulse to find solutions, to create solidarity, So I'm gonna try to pull up the video. It's as Alex just said, it's a whole documentary that follows. So only play a little bit. I'm gonna try
pull it up, and I can't remember. Please do name the reporter who does the documentary. I know that she's a big reporter in Puerto Rico, but But I also, the reason why I knew about her when I saw the music video was because of TikTok.
Okay.
She's gone kind of viral on TikTok, which is really interesting. There's a lot of coverage of Puerto Rico stuff there.
Yeah, it's amazing how he's able to generate such I don't know, there's always a public spectacle surrounding Bad Bunny, whether it's on TikTok, Instagram, on the VMAs. Like he just finds a way to captivate people's attention. You know, you have to look. So I don't know, what stands out to you? What do you see here?
So I pulled up some of the comments I remember writing down a while back. Izzy Ramirez had this thing that stuck with me for a while especially after seeing this. And she says, as bad as Bunny's celebrity exponentially grows, this shows where a refreshing reminder of what and who reggaeton is for. Bad Bunny didn't leave Puerto Rico behind as he ascended the charts. He brought it with him. And like, so when I saw that, like, it is like such excitement, jubilee. Gosh, maybe that's the right word.
A good one. Yeah.
That in the midst of, I think, collective grief and sorrow and anger, you know, for all the social ills happening in Puerto Rico, here is this anthem of resistance that I could see empowering Borinqueños to act for change. I mean, that's what I'm looking at when I see that. Like, reminds me in the midst of social ills, you know, Miriam singing in Exodus, and Mary singing in Luke. You know, here, you know, the liberation is yet to come fully realized, but singing and songs become an act of resistance. You know, I think that's what I'm seeing there.
Yeah,
what about you?
No, the visuals are awesome. It's powerful because he's mixing scenes from the lives of everyday people to these historical drawings and the news images. But I want to talk about the music itself, though, because I don't know, like when we're analyzing the deeper meaning, the spirituality with this song, the lyrics sure say something, but the rhythm, it's fascinating because again, you have the dembo, the reggaeton bass. Eventually, is going to go into house music when in the middle of the song, but the real foundation of this particular one is it's bomba y buena, which is, you know, a traditional Puerto Rican style of music derived from West Coast of Africa, and traditionally is played within spiritual religious contexts. You know, traditional like African fertility cults make use of these drum patterns to evoke a sense of the spirits present within their midst. So it's when you're talking about the sense of hope within the struggle in Puerto Rico, especially after the hurricane and all the political issues that ensued, what a perfect genre to be incorporating into such a song. Because again, there's an excitement, there's a joy, that jubilee, as you say, within this rhythm, but again, there's a spiritual reality that he's trying to tap into, that it's not just our human effort that brings about a solution to these political issues. There's something more, that if we want real joy, we have to look also beyond ourselves, even beyond the government and politics, to find it. So I don't know, I think what he's doing musically, rhythmically, it's very powerful.
So I'm curious, because I was going to mention when you stopped it, I was like, oh, you stopped it right before the best part. Because it reminds me of Frank Ocean's Nights, when there's these two different songs in one song. This song, like, when I'm listening to the beginning of it, I know the house music is going to come in. So like you said, there's a sense of, and I never named it until you're kind of bringing this up to my attention. I'm always like anticipating, and like there's a sense of like, okay, I know I have to experience this before I get to the house music. Like, it's what makes that moment better. You know, if that just came up as a song, I wouldn't be able to experience it in the same way. So there's a sense of anticipation, and as soon as the house music comes, it doesn't last that long either. It's like a very short portion, if I recall, of the song.
Well, I think enough anticipation is built up. So let's play that clip now that we've been waiting long enough to hear it. I'm gonna pull it back up. Hold on.
I'm curious. So this is the first time I'm ever thinking about this. So when there was conversations about best album of the year, right? I was really hoping it was either going to be Renaissance or Un Verano Sin Ti. Like I would have been fine with either one. Don't even want to talk about the winner, but like it happened. It happens a lot with the Grammys. But I remember the conversation around Renaissance as well was this just like Beyonce specifically invoking dance music and some of those roots because of some of maybe what you're getting to with some of Bad Bunny, like those acts of resistance, the fact that it's maybe wanting to live in that tension. And I guess I've never thought about the fact that Bad Bunny is incorporating, because I never thought about the first half as in itself a possible act in itself that's meaning to invoke. And he's putting both acts together in this one song, these two different traditions that are meant to awaken something in us. Is that part of what you're seeing here, specifically with those two different genres coming in?
Yeah, because I think the beginning is a little more, it's like the tension is, it's resolved. Not, I don't want to say totally resolved, but like there's a joy, there's a happiness there. Whereas in the house music, I don't know if I describe it as happy per se, but there's that, again, that dramatic expectation for happiness. You're trying, it's like you're trying to reach for it, because I don't know, thinking about like the fist, house music is fist pumping music. Like you're supposed to, go crazy to it. And it's like you're demanding something, like you want the answer. Whereas the Bon Mind Plena, it's like, okay, now we're celebrating. So he's highlighting these different elements within the human spirit, these different emotions, these different feelings we can have. So I love that he's always pulling us back and forth in his music.
You think that there's a sense of maybe escape?
Yeah.
There's a value in having those spaces.
And that's what house music initially, when it emerged, was about, because you had disco, which collapsed commercially, but then they kind of pick up on the same rhythmic patterns with house. And who is it who's listening to it? It's mostly oppressed communities who are, there are plenty of people who try to deal with the oppression through explicit political activism, through spirituality, religious community. But in house, it was more of this otherworldly escape. So predominantly Black communities, Latin Americans, queer communities, who are there like, what, right now we're not in a place to address the suffering, to get involved in political activism. We want to go somewhere else. We want to go to the club. We just want to dance. We want to forget our problem for some time. And it's interesting because, speaking of Beyonce and Renaissance, a lot of reviewers were saying this is the perfect album coming out of the quarantine, because there's all kinds of stuff we're dealing with right now. Sometimes we don't want to get into the politics. We don't want to be checking our social media feed and the news. Sometimes you just want to dance and forget that a lot of crazy things are going on. So there's definitely that aspect of the house piece of the song.
Yeah, and especially in that moment, they're in a blackout, and like there's really nothing you can do in that moment except maybe just dance and have a party of the year with your friends until the next morning.
yeah, and finding joy, having hope, even within a pretty difficult, annoying situation, the blackout, even knowing the hardships that it's going to bring long term. While we can, let's dance. Let's remember that life is still a gift, that it's something positive, that God is present, even in, again, the unideal situation. But I did want to highlight one of the things for me that stands out in all of Bad Bunny's catalog is, on one hand, there are songs where he's very transparent about his disillusionment with life, his sense that he doesn't have meaning, he doesn't have hope, and he wants it, but often doesn't know where to turn. So, for example, on his first studio album, there's the song Rolandito, which takes its name from a young kid who went missing in Puerto Rico. I think he must have been 7 years old back in the 90s. And he's using this as a metaphor for his identity, that he's lost himself, after gaining fame so quickly. It was a rapid rise to fame. He's like, okay, who am I? I don't even know anymore. And he talks about spirituality. He's like, should I pray to God? Should I look to astrology? I don't know what to do. So there are these moments when he's very transparent, even in these heartbreak songs where he's like, I want to be loved, but is it possible to have a lasting love? Is there someone who can really give my life that meaning, that value that I long for? Yeah, Augustinian kind of restlessness. But then he oscillates to this opposite extreme of like, I just want to forget it all. I just want to indulge in all these passions. I want to go crazy. And you see, like, in some of the songs, like if you take Safayera, when he talks about sexuality, it's absurdist. Like he's doing all these wild, crazy things that, nobody's actually doing. But it's not, I don't know, when you speak about like growing up in a conservative environment where secular music is questioned, when I hear those songs, like on a certain level, I'm scandalized. I'm like, are you seriously saying you're going to do all those things with the girl? It's insane. But then you're like, okay, it's not, if you read it literally, that's not what he's trying to say. Like the absurdism is trying to speak to this need to escape, this need to kind of distract yourself from this existential despair, this loneliness. So no, I think you have to have a certain level of spiritual maturity listening to him. Because like if a young kid's like, oh yeah, I want to go do all those things in the song. No, I would never advise someone to do that. But when you hear the song, you should say, yeah, like, where do I see myself trying to escape, trying to distract myself? What are healthy ways to explore this existential despair, the longing for meaning? Who can help me seek the answers? And again, like there are songs where he's saying that. So it's interesting, this back and forth that we see throughout all of his albums,
Yeah, and I sense from him, and I'll have to be honest, I've listened to more of his newer stuff than really like research and focus on his older stuff. But from what I recall, he's had quite a maturing journey himself.
Yeah.
From, I think, if I recall back in the day when he was coming out, reggaeton's typical culture, being misogynistic, and having a really big presence in reggaeton. When I think of where Bad Bunny is now, he's on the other side of that, critiquing it now. And I think I've seen within him the ability to even, like, as listeners, see that change happen and him become very vocal about it. I think part of that stands out. I had another thought in my head, but it escaped me.
I see what you're saying, though. Like there's definitely this trajectory towards a deeper self-awareness, deeper consciousness of his own journey. And one of my favorite songs that I want to play from Un Verano
Let's hear it.
Yeah, so in Titi Me Preguntó, it's interesting because he merges these two kind of conflicting poles into one song, which again, I think speaks to the fact that he understands, like, I'm conflicted, I'm oscillating back and forth between extremes. So the beginning of the song, he's partying, he's living it up, he's hanging out with all these girls, and there are I guess the revolving theme, the song that the theme that the song revolves around is, his aunt's like, okay, what are you doing with all these girls? When are you gonna settle down and get married?
Right.
And in the beginning, he's kind of like laughing her off. There's a point where he's in the club dancing with these girls, and he's like, oh, let's take a selfie and we'll send it to my titi, my aunt. But then in the middle, we have the voicemail message from his aunt. And then the song goes much more towards a gloomy kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And he admits, he's not really happy living this kind of libertine, indulgent lifestyle. He says, "Yo quisiera enamorarme, pero no puedo." I would like to fall in love. I'd want something meaningful and lasting, pero no puedo. I can't. So you see, he's aware that there's this time. So you see here that he's, again, he's thinking about what his aunt said to him, but he's kind of, brushing it off. He just wants to have a good time. Again, send the aunt a selfie, but I'm going to still hang out with these girls. Then we get to the part where he listens to his aunt's full voicemail message. And that's when he starts asking, I'd like to fall in love, but I can't. There's something blocking me. There's something blocking me from reaching this ideal, this fulfillment. So the other thing he says is that he doesn't even trust himself. So there's this awareness,
right?
That
yeah,
he alone doesn't have the answers. That there's this limitation, there's this block within him. But I'm wondering, Alex, when you see this part when he's while he's on the phone with his aunt, and then these hooded people, drag him into this van. What do you think that symbolizes? What do you think is going on in that moment?
I mean, literally, he's getting captured. Metaphorically, the voicemail captured him in a moment, captured him in his thoughts.
Yeah, my outlandish interpretation when I see that, because it's not the only time that someone's put a bag over his head. In the video for it was one of the earlier singles where something like that happened. I think it's in a way a metaphor of the fact that he rose so rapidly to fame, and that now as much as, yes, he's very creative, he is in the hands of these very powerful corporate elites, the record industry, who in a way, I wonder how much he views his spiritual struggle, his attempt to find his identity and his fulfillment, is hindered by his being dependent on these elites, these people who have so much power. And yeah, do determine the course of his career, do tell him, what direction to go in. So I don't know, perhaps it's them trying to, he's searching for the answers, he's searching for himself, but then they grab him, they take him to do whatever they think is going to be most marketable. Could be, could not be, but I don't know. I mean, there might be something there.
No, maybe. I really like it, because you can't be too outright, because you're going to piss off the wrong people. It's It reminds me of apocalyptic literature. You can't just straight up call out Rome. You got to use metaphor and say Babylon, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's too outlandish. Goodness. Do you? I had a question for you as you've been sharing, because I think I myself, and hopefully the listeners too, I'm learning a lot from our conversation. Really appreciate you sharing your insights. I am curious, how much of this do you think Bad Bunny is really attempting to? How much of that? Because I think to myself, some of these beats are just maybe ingrained in your bones that maybe you're not thinking about it too much. Do you think there's actual intentional thought of what he's doing with the music that has some of these historical roots?
Intentional thought, honestly, no. I think on a deeper internal level of his soul, yeah, his soul knows what's going on. He intuits that there's something within this music. There's something, again, this tension pulling him in different directions. I don't think he could articulate that or would articulate that, but on a deep level, I think he feels it within, and I think, again, anybody who listens closely and is asking these questions is saying, yeah, what impact is this having on me? What is it? What kind of emotions is it bringing out of me? I think anyone could really come to understand how profound his music actually is if you take the time to step back and say, yeah, what is this really about? But yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I think that's what because I think that's where, right, his inner spirit maybe is driving that. The spirit might be driving that.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's people outside of oneself that are like reading into it that can find so much deeper meaning in it. Gosh, I mean, that I feel like that reminds me of like scripture. There's so many things in scripture that, would they have thought this? Maybe not, but as we're reading now, like we're drawing all these deeper meanings, allowing for nuance to be nuance, allowing there to be complexity in something that seems so simple. Tempo changes, sound changes, to like even visually him being taken away. Like I could see how there are those layers that may be unintentional on his end or maybe intentional, but how I could sense the spirit then moves to give us even more meaning of what is happening within him and all of us to some extent. Because I think you're right, there's his honesty and vulnerability is something that I think many of us sometimes wish we could do, and if we do it, it's still something difficult to do.
Yeah, no, and I think as much as really going deep into his music, allowing it to make us ask these questions can be really spiritually grounding, spiritually nourishing. I think that's worth saying on the opposite end. If you don't listen to it with that kind of mature consciousness, asking those questions, it could also become detrimental to one's spiritual growth. Like it could, again, like I'm saying this having worked with young kids who do listen to him a lot, and when they hear certain crazy things that he's saying, they're like, oh yeah, I want to do that. It's like, again, I don't think his songs are meant to be taken literally, but if without somebody, like if you're young, without somebody guiding you, helping you to ask those questions, I think, yeah, like it can become a huge distraction. It can lead someone towards certain dark things. But at the same time, I see a lot of adults, again, especially parents of kids I know, who are like, oh, Bad Bunny, that's the devil's music. Don't listen to that. And that's not a solution either. There's something inherently fascinating about his music. There's something appealing. So rather than saying, just listen to it and do it, do whatever it makes you feel, or, you can't listen to it because that's evil. No, it's okay. You like the song. What does it say? What is true here? How can this help you deepen your journey towards understanding yourself and of God? With that kind of questioning, I think it can unleash such goodness, can allow us to grow. But again, there's that tension. The tension is between good and evil, between self-awareness and distractedness. It's always present.
Yeah, and what you're sharing reminds me of, like you said, when I was working with youth at my previous call, I would have what I would call cultural breakdowns, and we would listen to music and kind of holding on to Niebuhr's understanding of spirituality, of engaging with the spiritus, with our breath. What values, beliefs, and practices do we see arise from these songs? And I purposely would tell all the parents, we're going to be listening to music that may have cuss words, and I'm not going to be bleeping them out. Like, we're just going to listen to where they're at. This is only for our like juniors and seniors, but parents knew. And we would guide them in these I would guide them in these conversations with, ultimately my hope would be that they would have a critical lens of like what values, beliefs, and practices arise. And songs like, at the time, Thank You Next was a really big song by Ariana Grande.
Yeah.
And right, like you were saying earlier, if you're listening it to literally, maybe it sounds like thank you next to my, like thanks for being my ex, but I'm moving on, like kind of like an FU. But as we listened to it together, they came to these conclusions that were like, wow, she's actually expressing what she's learning from each person and giving them dignity. Like even when you want to like really just maybe burn your ex, she's not doing that. And then more importantly, she's learning that before she steps into a next relationship, she wants to love herself.
Yeah.
it was really cool to see the teenagers do that. But I think that's right. There's what you shared earlier. How do you help? Because if you were just to listen to the songs literally, I can see how that can be a really hard tension to live into. Because I've heard those same things about Bad Bunny from both my parents and, you know, from family members who are like, "Es la música del diablo. You don't want to listen to that."
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to a certain way, yeah, it could be. It can lead you towards spiritual darkness, sure, but it doesn't have to. And it's what you're saying about, like, I don't know, listening to something like Ariana Grande, Thank You Next. Perhaps she may not have intended to say anything spiritually profound, but when you're starting from a basis of faith, or looking through the lenses of faith, rather, like, it enables you to see certain really beautiful things, certain things that are true, even if it wasn't intended by the artist. And it's, yeah, so like that kind of work you're doing with young people, like that can be so transformative for them.
Yeah. Well, I remember the one that stood out the most was if she's getting to loving herself, and we believe in the Imago Dei, pervading God's image, you know, something that self-love is something that teenagers really wrestle with.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to listen to the song and step into that moment of, I should love myself? Partly because it's tied to my belief that I'm made in God's image, but also because it's part of it. God loves me, I should be loving myself. Yeah, like you said, there might be more profound meaning than intended.
Yeah.
But that critical lens can be so illuminating.
Yeah, so I mean, we're gonna have to wrap up in a second. So then I would want to ask you, Alex, where should we tell people to start off if they're unfamiliar with Bad Bunny's music? What should they listen to? What should they think about when they're listening to it? What do we want to leave people with?
What they should think. Well, I think, where should they start? Gosh, I'm a huge fan of albums, listening to albums. Maybe, I mean, El Apagón stood out to me, which is probably what I would share with someone. And I feel like I would, if you asked me that question, like at a dinner party, you would realize you'd be stuck with me for like another 15 minutes, because I would try to give you all the context before you stepped into it. I really do. My understanding of Un Verano Sin Ti is like what we've been sharing already, that tension, that nuance that exists. For me, it felt like the summer, the album of the summer.
Yeah.
Yet, like
Absolutely.
every summer ends.
Mm-hmm.
So like it can never be fully fulfilling. And the fact that it's called Un Verano Sin Ti, there's already a tension in the title of the album. I tie that, when I was, you know, reading and writing about it, to ecclesiastical faith, this tension.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would tell them to start with Un Verano Sin Ti, with that kind of maybe lens. Though I don't have maybe a specific song. I'm curious what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody needs to listen to Un Verano Sin Ti in its entirety. What I also would recommend, I mean, I think Rolandito is one of the most spiritually profound songs, so I'd definitely say listen to that, look at the lyrics, but also, and I think going all the way to the opposite pole, Zafaera, because lyrically it's outrageous, like the things he's talking about. You know, don't take those literally, please. But listen to the rhythm, because what he's doing there is he's combining these samples from old school reggaeton songs. He's taking from Jamaican reggae songs, like, you know, the famous Murder, She Wrote. Then he's taking Missy Elliott. So it's this amalgam of different songs that there's something very carnal, something very like earthy about it. It's like you feel like something is something creeping up on you as you hear the beat building up. And I don't know, like it awakens. I would just say, like, as you listen, like think about like what kind of emotions is it awakening in you? What is it making you think about? Don't just get lost in the rhythm, but like think about what is it saying? Because there's so much there. It's a crazy song, but it's loaded. Yeah.
I will say, Stephen, one of the takeaways I'm getting from all of this is one, to go back. One, I think this morning I feel like I want to go back and listen to this now, but specifically to ground myself, because I think I tend to stay in my head, and maybe some of the people listening are like me. You're like analyzing it, you're enjoying it, like, yeah, it's fun. I'll roll down my windows and I'll listen, but I'm listening to like some of the words that are sticking out, maybe some of the paradigms being presented, etc., versus maybe just taking a step back. Because I even mentioned this in the paper I wrote of like, Un Verano Sin Ti is filled with merengue and these traditional Latin sounds that have such a deep historical history in our quest for liberation, our acts of resistance, etc. And I mentioned that like almost like as an aside, look how he's taking in this like catalog of like so many sounds into an album, versus saying to myself, if you were to just ground yourself for a moment in the bodily resonation that occurs and the reactions, the responses, I think I'm getting a takeaway today from just take a moment to just ground yourself in how these beats move and feel. And I really am appreciative of that one simple lesson that I think is actually quite profound. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and what I'm getting from reading your essay, which I think everyone should read, but also what we're saying now, the potential for music in general to become a form of political resistance, or to at least to make commentary on things going on in the political realm. Because again, El Apagón is a great song to dance to, but it also can raise these very big questions about what's going on in the government, what's going on socially. And as you said in the article, like looking back at old salsa, looking at Joe Arroyo, like this is part of a much greater tradition. So that's an important thing to consider. So, but before we go, Alex, is there anything you want to plug? Any way that you want to tell people to find your work or reach out to you?
Sure. So I am on Instagram. It's really simple. Rev Alex G Evangelista. If you go to my Twitter, it's just Rev Alex, but instead of the L, it's a 1. I post about Presbyterian world stuff and Bachelor Nation. So if you're a Bachelor fan, I love critiquing that from a sports perspective, which is really fascinating. And of course on Facebook, I think it's just Alex Evangelista as well. I was mentioning this article. You can find it on the Presbyterian Outlook. Why you should listen to Bad Bunny.
Awesome. Okay. And so I'm on Twitter, Stephen G. Adebato. My Instagram is Cracks in Pomo, which is the name of my podcast, and my Substack, Cracks in Postmodernity. So if you want to read my writing, you can find it all there. The podcasts on YouTube, Spotify, etc. But that being said, Alex, I really enjoyed this. It was an enlightening conversation. It's a lot of fun. So thank you.
Likewise, thank you so much. And thank you to HTI and Open Plaza.
And thanks to everybody listening.
All right, bye for now.
This has been an HTI production. For more information, visit us at htiopenplaza.org. The Hispanic Theological Initiative provides Open Plaza as a public service. The views expressed by the guests are their own. Their appearance on this program, or any reference to a specific product or entity they represent, does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by HTI.